at this, a campus that doesn't actually try to arrest me when I come. So first of all, thanks to Young America's Foundation, thanks to the students at UW-Madison YAF for their courage in sponsoring this event. And before I begin, I did come bearing gifts for the social justice warriors in the room. I hear you started wearing these safety pins around because you want to show your fellow college students how you're not one of these awful, terrible Trump people and that you're sensitive and that you want to signal your virtue. So I brought along these safety pins just for you. And I also brought along something for you to wear them with, this diaper. It's time to stop being self-indulgent, children. It's time. The folks, in case you hadn't noticed, the folks with the swastikas aren't too nice to my type. Stop being self-indulgent, children. Stop pretending that everybody who voted for Trump is a vicious racist. It's your right to protest, of course, but you just make yourself look like an idiot when you cry over a duly held election. By the way, I didn't vote for Trump. You can keep whining about reality like privileged snowflakes, but you're going to melt in the sun of reality. And by the way, Donald Trump doesn't care whether you protest. Donald Trump is sitting somewhere in Trump Tower eating a steak and bathing in your salty, salty tears. He didn't care. Now, I hear that a lot of folks at this university, publicly funded university, want this campus to become a sanctuary campus for illegal immigrants. I do have a quick question. If this campus can be a sanctuary for people in the country illegally, why are so many people trying to ban American citizens from this community from coming to this lecture? That was an actual thing today. There was an attempt to try to stop members from the general community from coming to this lecture. And by the way, I'm fully aware of this private Facebook page titled F White Supremacy Interrupting Ben Shapiro. Well, with all due respect, F you right back, gang. By the way, just for the record, according to the Anti-Defamation League, I was the #1 journalistic target of white supremacists this year. It's been a weird year for me. On the one hand, I've been targeted by Black Lives Matter and called the KKK. On the other hand, I've been called Black Lives Matter by David Duke, so it's been really weird. Thanks, by the way, to a Wisconsin State Senator Dewey Strobel. He wrote today, as a taxpayer-funded university, Madison should make efforts to have more events open to the public, not fewer. But for those leftists who want to make this a sanctuary campus, what if I just declare everybody who's my fan illegal and then they can come whenever they want? Okay, now on to some more important matters. Today we're going to debunk 3 favorite terms of the left. These are so... Shame! Shame! Wow, it's like Game of Thrones. Should I get undressed and walk down the aisle? I do love it. Hey guys, how's it going? Are you done yet, or you want to you can keep standing, people behind you can't see. I'm happy to talk with you. Safety! 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 Did somebody fart? Safety! USA! 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 Okay, so do we have that out of the way, or are you going to continue doing this? Like, really? I tell you, try not to be children, and the first thing you do is start screaming like my 2-year-old. I tell you not to be children, the first thing you do is stand up and start screaming like my 2-year-old. And by the way, you see, this is how conservatives actually treat people. You stand up and you interrupt and you shout safety, and you're perfectly safe. Look at that. It's amazing. Look how that works. And for the record, you should also clarify your chants. If you're going to shout safety, you should at least clarify who farted first. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 terms that the left likes to sling around with abandon. These are social justice, white privilege, and safe spaces. Now, I understand this may make some people a little upset. It's okay. You'll live. You really will. It'll be okay. We're all here for you. We'll take care of you. We'll make sure that we pat you on the head and make you feel all better afterward. And honestly, facts don't care about your feelings. And Okay. So first of all, honest to God. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I have to explain to you how semantics work. Like, really, I think that's important now. Okay. You're so boring. You're so boring. Okay, so let me explain to you something, okay? If you're gonna pick a chant like shame, who, me? If you're gonna pick a chant like shame, watch Game of Thrones first. The bad guys shout shame. You're not changing anybody's mind. All you're showing everybody is that your collective IQ, if it were channeled into electricity, might be able to toast a piece of bread lightly. Okay, so can we talk now, or are you going to keep shouting? Like, really, now's your chance to get it out. Let's hear your feeling. Come on. Just go for it. Or it's going to be like every 30 seconds, like the annoying microwave timer. Like, you got anything more? You got anything more? Okay, are we done? Thank you. All right. Social justice. Now, normally I don't like to do this, but if we have any peace officers, this actually is now a disturbance that we would like to get past so that we can actually have a discussion. If you guys want to talk, we can talk. If you want to shout, get the hell out. For God's sake, at least wait till I say something that offends you before being offended. So, social justice is an oxymoron. Okay? If a guilty man is acquitted because he's the right race, that is anti-justice. If an innocent man is convicted because he's the wrong race, that's anti-justice. Social justice, however, suggests that your group identity, your identity as a person, relieves you of individual responsibility to be a decent human being. So you get to interrupt lectures if you're the right race, or if you're the right gender, or the right sexual orientation. You get to do these things without punishment because, after all, that's in the nature of social justice, group justice. We don't hold you responsible for your individual actions. You get extra points in heaven because you were born with a certain skin color or sexual orientation. Shame. Today, all you hardcore leftists call yourselves social justice warriors, and you do this because you believe that individual justice is racist and sexist and bigoted and homophobic. Individual justice suggests that we each be held responsible for our actions, but SJWs think that's unfair because we're not just individuals, of course, we're members of groups. What if the groups are disproportionately poor? What if they're disproportionately in jail? How can we achieve group justice if individual justice keeps getting in the way? Right? If it turns out that certain groups have more members in jail disproportionately, that must be because something deeply wrong has happened, the system is rigged against that group. It can't be because a lot of individuals within that particular group have committed crimes. Now, the problem with this logic is it sounds sort of bad. If you think of people only in terms of their racial or ethnic groups or their sexual orientation, that's sort of racist, it's sort of homophobic, it's actually sort of discriminatory. You're not any better a person for being black or gay or Jewish. Race doesn't mean anything. Social group is only important if the social group is propagating good things. If you just arbitrarily group people about skin color, that's just called tribalism. Racial diversity doesn't actually mean anything. See, that's what a decent, hardworking person sounds like, as opposed to a loser student here on the public dime, presumably. This is a public university. Everybody here is presumably on the public dime. Okay, so racial diversity doesn't mean anything. Decency means everything. Diversity isn't good unless the people who are racially diverse are doing good things. Diversity isn't bad unless the people doing bad things are racially diverse. Diversity isn't our strength. Decency is our strength. Decency, remember that? Decency. Shame. Decency. Shame. Decency. Shame. Decency. Shame. Decency. Shame. Decency. Shame. Decency. 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 All right, guys. But as you can tell, the left does not care about decency. They care about groups. Why? Because the left doesn't believe in individuals. Instead, they believe that individual rights get in the way of creating their collectivist utopia. They think fairness can only be achieved for everyone if all groups end up in the same place. They want fairness. Not fairness of opportunity or fairness of rights, fairness of outcome. Cosmic justice. Now, individual fairness of outcome cannot be achieved by government interventions, and SJWs know this. So instead, they suggest that the reason that individuals aren't achieving individual fairness is because of collective unfairness, right? Victim groups have been sinned against. The real reason that some groups are less successful in America than others, or some individuals are less successful than others, that's because of white privilege, right? According to the left, if there is inequality of outcome, that's because there's shadowy white privilege. It's living in the shadows, squashing people of other colors. White privilege is inherent in everything, from capitalism to free speech. Any system that doesn't result in racially diverse results, that must be the result of white privilege. So we have to tear down white privilege. And this is a really seductive idea. The campus left simply gives people this feeling of virtue by counting them members of victimized identity groups. If you're an underachieving black woman, the left says you're underachieving not because of the decisions that you've made, but because the system hates you. If you're an underachieving gay Hispanic man, you must be failing because the system targets people like you. According to the campus left, the only people who certainly have not been victimized are, of course, white heterosexual cisgender males. Right? The system was built to benefit them. The founding fathers designed a governmental, economic system to protect their own interests at the expense of minorities everywhere. This white privilege, say all these members of the campus left, extends to every area of American life. It's totally inescapable. You're born into it if you're white. You're born with a heavy burden on your back that can never, ever be alleviated if you're born non-white or non-straight or non-male. Now, there is good news for those of us who are white, heterosexual, cisgender males. There is a way to relieve ourselves of this burden. All we have to do is shout shame at ourselves. Right? If we shout shame at ourselves and we acknowledge that the system is privileged in our favor, then everything's cool again. All we have to do is just get up and say mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. It's all our fault.
Shame!
Now, before we go any further, decency, 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 decency. Sorry. Okay, if you guys are all going to come up here, can we at least have circle time or something? Are you guys having a tough time seeing?
Safety! 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 Safety!
Oh, you go to school. Oh. question. Do you know me? Do I know you? Like, how do you know anything about me? Why am I a white supremacist? Because you guys are here shouting down people who are speaking. Really? Okay, last time. How what starts? What are we even talking about? What is it? And why, if you have a question, why don't you just ask it? I'm happy to talk with you, but this is nonsensical. This doesn't help. What was that? Well, then tell your people to sit down. We're having a question-answer period. Well, then who are they? If you want to have a conversation, let's have a conversation. But this is not productive. This is whiny nonsense.
Continues to protect free speech that is hate speech.
They bring people. Okay, first off.
As I said, this is our campus, and we are here tonight to ask what your commitment is. To ensuring that students that have the highest risk on this campus right now, queer and trans students of color, Muslim students, undocumented students. I speak with those people and I ask what you are doing to ensure that they are not killed right now. When you talk about dismantling safe spaces, the very presence of that space on campus. The very presence of that space on this campus tells us you are not looking out for them. Their safety is not your concern. Safety! Safety! Safety!
There are people over there right now making sure that you can stand up there. The least you can do is be decent about it and show them some respect.
guys are awesome. I appreciate your patience. Just so you all know how this was working. Okay, the reason that those people were not arrested is that the administration decided, full transparency, because I like transparency, that if they called the cops and arrested those students, they would have shut down the entire event. So that's what the administration decided. Instead, they just sort of asked them, and they said, you can have your time at the front of the stage. All I can wonder is if the administration would allow the same sort of privilege for any sort of conservative who decided to do this at a lefty event. And let me just say, this nonsense about white supremacy, it is the vilest form of bullshit racism to suggest that all white people who disagree with you are racist. Okay, now, when last we left our story, we were talking, man, doesn't the school give homework, or does anybody have a job around here? I guess when you're majoring in gender and diversity studies, you got a lot of time on your hands. All right, so to get back to where we were talking about white privilege and the left's view that that America is inherently racist. All of you are racist, as you saw, and we know because people tell you that you're racist, right? They don't know you. They don't know anything about you. One of the gals over here, I turned off the mic so you couldn't hear the conversation. I said to her, she's the one who was shouting that you're all white supremacists. I said, you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. How do you know I'm a white supremacist? And she said, well, that's the image you give off. And I said, really? Was it the yarmulke that did it for you? Now, before we talk about, the left's argument is basically that inequality between groups is inequity. If there's any sort of inequality between racial groups, that's because something has happened in the United States that is deeply unfair and is currently happening. Not just has happened in the past, but it's happening right now. We are all the beneficiaries of white privilege. We are all the purveyors and propagators, words they don't understand, of white privilege, right? Now, it is true, before we go any further, that black people in the United States have obviously suffered historic discrimination. Right? It's inarguably true. Of course that's true. It's even true that some people are likely suffering from the effects of historic discrimination under things like Jim Crow, but that does not mean that black people right now are suffering from institutional discrimination. And historic discrimination does not explain current levels of inequality. It certainly doesn't justify discrimination against white people who had nothing whatsoever to do with Jim Crow. Individuals all over America experience inequality. Some of us are born rich, some of us are born poor, some of us are born smart, some of us are born protesters. Right? Nobody is capable of righting wrongs done to people 3 generations ago by penalizing their great-grandchildren. You can't do that. The solution to historic injustice is not modern injustice. 3 generations ago, my people were being slaughtered by the millions in Europe, and FDR wouldn't let Jews into the country. That doesn't mean there's widespread anti-Jewish privilege throughout America that requires restitution from all of you. That's not how this works. We cannot fix where you started in life. We can't. That's beyond your control. That's beyond my control. But the notion of white privilege suggests you can never, under any circumstances, overcome where you started in life. Because there's this big bear called white privilege that's trying to eat you. That if you make even if you make all the right decisions, white privilege will stand in your way. That is a lie, but it is a lie that this campus obviously promotes. In 2013, the history department created mandatory diversity training, giving out handouts on the re-education process, which sounds kind of Orwellian, needed for white people to overcome racist conditioning. This university has sponsored a multitude of events on white privilege and supported the lying Black Lives Matter movement. New freshmen are supposed to take diversity training where they learn, of course, about white privilege. As Katrina Morrison, a junior from Milwaukee, said last year, quote, we wanted to talk about privilege. What is white privilege? What are the sets of privileges that we all have? It's okay that we have these different sets of privileges and identities and can still coexist. The new Wisconsin training program, which was initiated for the freshmen this year, it's going to cost about $200,000. And it includes students taking part in discussion groups, writing about their experiences, and practicing other mental exercises to help them realize their feelings toward other ethnicities. As you can see, this has been a wild success. In general, it turns out there's another reason that in a free country some people fail and some people succeed. Some values, some behavior is better than other values and behavior. And people who tend to hold fast to better values do better than people who don't. Perhaps equality of opportunity only exists so long as people are willing to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's the truth. White privilege isn't reality. It's just a cowardly way to blame somebody else for your own failures to live up to decent standards. Whites are not born with a genetic predisposition to doing the right thing, in some arbitrary moral system that benefits whites for doing the right thing. There are 3 simple life rules that will guarantee that you are not permanently poor in the United States, regardless of race, regardless of gender. Finish high school, get a job, get married before you have babies. That's it. And I guarantee you that everybody in this room and all the people outside are capable of this. Right? You've already finished high school. Everybody, even the poli-sci majors, will eventually get a job. And you're all capable of not having babies before you get married. Just don't put that there right now without that thing on it. Come on. There is no such thing as generalized white privilege or institutional racism. There is just decision privilege. For example, it turns out that the greatest privilege in American society is being born with 2 parents in the home. And that is true for every single race. It is true regardless of race. The poverty rate among 2-parent black families in the United States is 7%. The poverty rate among white single-parent families is 22%. What happened to the white privilege? Why isn't the white single mother richer than the black 2-parent family? Well, because single mothers are not richer than 2-parent families. End of story. The single greatest predictor of intergenerational poverty in America is single motherhood. White privilege is not responsible for elevated levels of black men getting black women pregnant and leaving. Okay, it is not. And white privilege, by the way, is also not responsible for an increasing number of white men getting white women pregnant and then leaving. There's no white person holding a gun to some dude's head telling him, screw your girlfriend and take off. It's not happening, okay? How about, here's another privilege. Okay, people are always whining about the white privilege in the criminal justice system. Here's another privilege that I think is more important. It's what I like to call the not committing crimes privilege. Okay, the higher criminality rate in the black community is not the result of some evil white system of skin privilege. It's because individuals are committing crimes. If you don't want to go to jail for murder, I have an easy solution. Don't murder people. Here is the fact about that supposedly evil criminal justice system. It actually under-prosecutes murder in minority communities. You know why? Because minority communities are under-policed. When police do come into contact with black people to take the lying, disgusting Black Lives Matter movement's cause, police are less likely to kill black people than white people in the same circumstances. As early as 1994, the DOJ surveyed felony cases in the country's 75 largest urban areas. You know what they found? Lower felony prosecutions for blacks than whites. A deadly force lab study from Washington State University last year found that participants were biased in favor of black suspects in simulated threat scenarios. In 2015, the DOJ investigated the Philly Police Department for racism. You know what they found? They found white police officers were less likely than black or Hispanic police officers to shoot black suspects. Just a few months ago, front page of the New York Times, study from Harvard University, Professor Roland Fryer, he surveyed 1,000 police shootings. He found black suspects are shot less often than white suspects in comparable situation. By the way, Fryer is black. In 2015, the cops shot, here's the total statistic, you ready? In 2015, the cops shot 987 people who died. A huge majority of those were armed or threatening deadly force. Blacks represented 26% of those shot. Blacks also represent in the United States nearly 50% of all murder perpetrators. Police officers are 18.5 times more likely to be shot by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by the cops. How about the white privilege of stop and frisk? We hear this one all the time, right? The white stop and frisk is super duper racist. Mayor de Blasio, that idiot communist from New York, he thinks that. In New York, the reason why stop and frisk keeps running into minorities is because minorities keep committing crimes. Between January and June 2008, 98% of all gun assailants in the city of New York were black or Hispanic. Stop and frisk targeted 85% black and Hispanic. So statistically, they were discriminating against white people, actually. Right? If there is white privilege, it's in over-policing white communities and under-policing minority communities. Black areas plagued by violent crime don't need fewer cops, they need more cops. And they won't get them, thanks to people like those Black Lives Matter protesters. And more black people will die because of that. How about pulling people over for speeding? Right? They keep saying you're driving while black. This is the idea. Only one problem. So for example, the DOJ thought that the New Jersey State Police, the troopies in New Jersey, they thought that they were pulling over black people at elevated rates. So they did a study. This is back in '94 under Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton's DOJ. And what they found was that black people sped disproportionately. Blacks were 25% of all speeders, and 23% of drivers stopped for speeding. How about sentencing disparities? You hear this one too, right? I'm just going through and debunking all of your sociology classes now, okay? How about sentencing disparities? They're always talking about the difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. You know why there's a difference in sentencing between crack cocaine and powder cocaine? The reason is because black legislators from the inner city were sick of watching crack ravage their communities. They wanted more penalties and higher penalties to get the drug dealers out of their communities, because crack is more addictive and easier to distribute than powder cocaine. If you actually want a comparable substance, take the sentence for crystal meth. Crystal meth has exactly the same sentence for a possession of 1 ounce, and virtually all the people who are arrested for possession of crystal meth are white. But all of this is white privilege, right? It's all white, everything is white privilege. When Baltimore riots, when a majority black city riots after a majority black police force is involved in the death of a black man, and the city has a majority black city council and an entirely Democratic city council, and there's a black district attorney, and a black mayor, and a black attorney general, and a black president of the United States, the riots are because of white privilege. And that's how this works. And if we're going to talk about privilege, according to the left, the idea is that if there's a group that's doing well in the United States, it's because of privilege. Let's talk about the really privileged people in America, the people who are certainly suffering from systemic privilege, who are really benefiting, I should say. And this, of course, is the nefarious Asians, right? Those nefarious Asians, those terrible, terrible Asians, right? Asian people do better in terms of, on general score scale, they do better on standardized tests to get into college. A Princeton University study showed back when the SATs were out of 1600, blacks were receiving a bonus of 230 points on the SATs at Ivy Leagues versus their competitors. Asians were being penalized 50 points, which makes perfect sense and is totally fair because the country was built to benefit Asian people, right? We have to punish the Asian people because the system was built to benefit them, obviously. I mean, come on. This is why the Constitution was written by Asian founders in Korean. Now, as you may notice, if you accuse a racial group of privilege without evidence, it looks an awful lot like horrible racism, doesn't it? But that's what the left does constantly, and that's what we just saw tonight, when every white person in the audience was labeled a white supremacist and a beneficiary of white privilege without one single solitary shred of evidence. It turns out there's no such thing as white privilege. Fact-based perspectives are not a privilege. Values are not a privilege. White privilege is just a way to tell you that if you're a white person, you need to shut up. That's all that white privilege is. Okay, so if we can't actually achieve equality of outcome, according to the left, then we need to do something else. We need to make everybody feel equal. We'll have to have, our feelings have to be, we have to feel warm and fuzzy inside. It's so important. All these people here have to feel so special. They have to come down and stand here until they feel like their mommies love them more. They have to be down here feeling good about themselves. Their hearts must warm at the feelings that they feel. We all have to feel great about ourselves. We all have to feel like precious, wonderful snowflakes. And that means trigger warnings. We have to warn people when we're about to trigger them. Unless, of course, you're on the left. Then you can trigger away, right? You can threaten people with violence. You can disturb lectures. You can do whatever the hell you want. Earlier this year, there's a black student here. His name was Denzel McDonald, and he was arrested. He was arrested for graffitiing messages on campus, including F the police, the devil is a white man, spelled I-Z. I don't know if they teach spelling at this university. And white supremacy is a disease. McDonald was charged with 11 preliminary counts of vandalism, 1 for disorderly conduct, for allegedly threatening to murder someone who witnessed him doing the graffiti. So, were there massive protests against McDonald? Nope. The Afro-American Studies Department sent a letter to the students explaining, quote, "What so many of you are experiencing isn't a sign of individual weakness. It's a version of post-traumatic stress syndrome, a mental health crisis as serious as those following campus shootings or natural disasters." Why? Because the cops came in the room to the rest of the guy. A letter signed by 700 students and faculty, written by Dr. Johanna Almiron, who has a future doing other useless things, whined about the evil police arresting McDonald in class. She called it an ambush, and she explained, quote, "The way UWPD officers entered my class was very aggressive, with bulletproof vests and guns visible. Oh no! I cannot believe they humiliated and terrified my students." Okay, really? Like, we have a bunch of people in this room, including a military member in the audience. A lot of people in this room, both the guys. Both the wonderful fellows who provide security for me have gone to war in both Afghanistan and Iraq. All I can say, And all I can say is that if you're in a classroom and cops come to arrest a graffiti artist who threatens somebody with murder, and you're very offended by the sight of the gun, you are just a giant pansy. By the way, after all of this, there was another campus protest. You guys are good at that here, apparently. It was titled, "We Are God," which is weird. God doesn't know about it. It says, "We Are God, a day of disrupting white supremacy and anti-black racism at UW-Madison." Remember, all of this was about a black guy graffitiing, "F the police, and the devil is a white man," and then being arrested. Right? It's white supremacy to arrest that guy. The protesters said they wanted to let the chancellor know that there are consequences for perpetuating white supremacy. And after all this is totally legit because they were microaggressed, right? They were microaggressed. That's the other big word on campus these days, microaggressions. We have to be careful that we should never say anything that people can even construe as offensive. Right? It doesn't actually have to be offensive. They just have to, in their weak little pathetic pea brains, they have to decide that they are offended, and then they have been microaggressed, and then they get to lash out at people, right? That's how microaggressions work. That's the beautiful thing about calling them microaggressions. It's not just you said something that offended me. You have aggressed me. You did something that aggressed me, and the proper response to aggression is aggression. So if I microaggress you, you get to macroaggress me. And some of the things that the left thinks are microaggressions are just insipid. Right? If you say, "I'm colorblind," really, on campus now, they consider this a microaggression, which is weird, because I thought that it was bad to see people in terms of their race. But now I'm being informed it's good to see people in terms of their race, unless you're a white people, in which case you're racist, right? If you use terms like he and she, this can be perceived as offensive to people who do not consider themselves cisgender. Again, weird, because biology. If you say things like, "Where are you from?" If you say, "Where are you from?" this is considered a microaggression, because if you ask someone where they're from, you're implying they're not from here. Right, because I assume you weren't born, like, right here. Like, on this spot, I assume you weren't born. Like, where are you from? Okay, so, and obviously if you say anything remotely factual, that's a microaggression too, and you get to shut down events and be an idiot. Okay, so, at this campus, obviously, new freshmen have to be educated about diversity. Joshua Moon Johnson is the special assistant to Vice Provost for Student Life. He said, quote, "College is often the first time where people are exposed to people who are different from themselves. Those could be religious differences, racial, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. Many of the incidents reported to the team involved disrespectful speech that was intended to be funny or inquisitive." Okay, so maybe you shouldn't be that offended. Maybe you should just say that was a bad joke. Or maybe you should just leave. Wow. Okay. But Johnson says that students have to be taught the historical context surrounding race, difference, and violence, unless, of course, you're a white person, then screw you. The training talks about identity, culture, and microaggressions. Johnson, by the way, said that his particular set of work is influenced by his personal identity as a Christian, queer, multiracial, Asian American, Euro-American man who grew up in Mississippi, which is a lot of labels. And the nice thing is that the more labels you grant yourself, the more ways you can be offended, which means the bigger a hero you are to people on the left. At UW-Milwaukee, one group actually asked people to stop using terms like lame, trash, and politically correct. If you use lame, trash, or politically correct, these are microaggressions. Mike Sportiello, who's the head of student government and a future lame, politically correct trash collector, he said that the campaign was designed to talk about how you feel. Life is about looking at how everyone feels and interacting with each other, and then presumably if you don't feel good, you hit somebody, right? And this has bled up, unfortunately, to broader swaths of the left. So I've experienced this personally, and I love telling this story. So who here has ever watched CNN headline news? Show of hands. Okay, this is the entire crowd that has ever seen CNN headline news. No one else in America has ever seen it. They don't know it exists, right? So they have no ratings at CNN headline news. So this would have been about a year ago, and it was when Caitlyn Jenner was in the news, because Caitlyn Jenner is, of course, the great hero of our time. And ESPN was deciding ESPN had decided to give Caitlyn Jenner the Hero of the Year award. It was very important. Caitlyn Jenner was a great hero because Caitlyn Jenner is a transgender individual. So CNN looked up conservative in the white pages. They actually do this in LA, and I'm the only one there. And so they called me in. I'm the only conservative in a 30-mile radius, and they said, "Can you come in and talk about this?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, well, they always pre-screen you and say, "What's your perspective on this?" I said, "Well, my perspective is there's nothing heroic about somebody who's suffering from mental illness. And I take mental illness very, very seriously. There are mentally ill people in my family. Pretending that the delusions of mentally ill people are reality and that we all have to conform to those delusions does no service to the mentally ill, and it does no service to the rest of society. Caitlyn Jenner needs help. Caitlyn Jenner does not need to be feted for mutilating his body." Right? This is my perspective on transgenderism. Okay, so they call me in, and they say, and they bring me into the green room, and the producer comes up to me, and he says, so we here at CNN Headline News have no ratings. And I said, yes, I'm well aware. And, and he said, so tonight we really want you to just say what's on your mind, just say what you feel. I said, you came to the right place. And then he says, and by the way, I used to produce for Jerry Springer. It was at this point that I should have started having some second thoughts. But since I deal with this stuff on a fairly regular basis, I figured, okay, what's the big deal? So we go into the studio, and they seat me here, and there's, I think, 3 people who are to the right of me and 3 people on stage, right? And all of them are of the left. So it's me against 6 leftists, which makes it almost fair for them. And they start the discussion. And the discussion is, should Caitlyn Jenner be given the honorary Medal of Honor? Should Caitlyn Jenner be given a burial spot at Arlington National Cemetery? Should Caitlyn Jenner be appointed Pope? Should we construct a golden chariot to carry Caitlyn Jenner to the sky like Elijah, right? That was the nature of the conversation. It wasn't, is this heroism? It was, how great is the heroism? Like, more or less than the guys who stormed the beaches at Normandy. Right, that was the discussion. And then finally they come to me, and I expressed the opinion that I just expressed to you. They said, does Caitlyn Jenner deserve the award? And I said, no, I don't think Caitlyn Jenner deserves the award. There's nothing heroic that happened here. And I neglected to mention one thing. The person sitting next to me was a transgender person. The transgender person's name is Zoe Tur. Zoe is formerly Bob, and Zoe had about 100 pounds on me, and his voice is an octave lower than my own. So we're having this discussion. And Zoe, and I say what I'm saying, biology matters. There are only 2 sexes. You don't get to make up in your own mind what your sex is and then tell everybody else to deal with it. I can't call myself Napoleon Bonaparte and expect everybody else to just call me commander. That's not the way that it works, right? I can, if I had to identify as anything, by the way, I would certainly go with Your Grace. But in any case, this discussion goes on, and the transgender person sitting next to me, Zoe, turns to me and says, you don't know anything about biology, little boy. And I said, well, I know for a fact that every single cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body contains a Y chromosome, except ironically for some of his sperm cells. And Zoe Tur says, well, you don't know anything about genetics, little boy. I just keep repeating this over and over. You don't know anything about genetics, little boy. And finally, I turn to Zoe Tur and I say, well, what are your genetics, sir? And honest to God, I did not actually mean to offend anyone. It's just that where I come from, you call men sir and you call women ma'am. And he is a biological man, whether he thinks so or not. So I said to him, what are your genetics, sir? And it was the sir that set him off, obviously. And he reaches, this is on live national television now. He reaches over and he grabs me by the back of the neck on live national TV. And he says, if you don't cut that out, I'll send you home in an ambulance. And honest to God, my first thought was, that doesn't even make any sense. You don't go home in an ambulance. But what I actually said was, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political conversation. Because normally when I engage in political conversations with people, they don't threaten to do me bodily harm while grasping the back of my neck with their not particularly feminine hands. But here's the punchline of the story. It's not just that I'm a jackass. The punchline of the story is that everybody on the panel, every single person on the panel, nobody has any problem with the assault and battery that just occurred on their set on live TV. Every single person goes, how could you say that to Zoe? That was just terrible. How could you possibly say that? You knew that was going to offend Zoe. And that's the first time I dropped facts don't care about your feelings. Like, I'm sorry that it offends Zoe Tur, that Zoe Tur is a man, but Zoe Tur is a man. By the way, the threats of violence continued after this. As Zoe was hulking out of the set, Zoe turned to me and said, I'll see you in the parking lot. And security actually had to escort me to my car, which was really weird. That was not how I envisioned my night going. And then later that night on Twitter, Zoe Tur threatened to curb stomp me, all of which I thought was deeply unladylike behavior. But of course, all of this is okay according to the left because nobody bothers to ask whether microaggressions are free speech. It doesn't matter to folks on the left. Instead, they simply have to be quashed, right? That's totalitarianism, using force of the gun to silence people who disagree with you. And the folks on the left control the campus dialogue. Because if you call yourself a victim, that makes you the good guy. You can do anything to the person who's the bad guy. There's a woman, I guess, named Nika Akubizi. Don't want to get her name wrong. She's executive director of United Council of UW Students, Inc. And she said this year, she said, maybe I can't pay attention in class because someone calls me the N-word on my way to school, which is terrible, obviously. Microaggressions happen continually. So any effort to decrease those, increase opportunity for students of color, women, queer folks to have space that is not oppressive to learn in. I don't think limiting microaggressions is limiting free speech. Yes, it is, by definition. You are free to say whatever you want in the United States of America, and nobody gets hit. This is the first principle of Western civilization. But don't worry, they're not for limiting free speech or anything, right? I mean, these people down here, they weren't limiting free speech. And once you've done all this, you've created a safe space. That's the beautiful thing. Now you finally have a magical safe space where everyone can feel equal, right? Except for the people who can't speak. Those people just shut up. They don't have to feel equal. But the rest of these people, they can all feel really safe. And they shout things like safety. Now, I was just here. Were there any threats of violence against the people shouting safety like scared little girls? No, there were no threats of violence. In fact, people were urging them. Why don't you tell us what you want so you can get the hell out of here? Right? No, that's not how, but according to them, it is inherently unsafe for people to disagree with you. It is inherently unsafe for people to disagree with you under any circumstances whatsoever. And now, of course, we have to host safe spaces for everybody. So if somebody wears a stupid costume to a UW football game, right, then we have to hold a safe space for that, right? This happened like a couple of weeks ago here. You had to hold a safe space because somebody wore a costume to the football game that was a jailbird costume. On one side was Hillary Clinton's face, on the other side was Obama's face, and then somebody dressed up as Trump and a rope around the neck. Okay, it wasn't a lynching thing. It was leading around a prisoner. And by the way, it wasn't a lynching thing also because Hillary Clinton is a white woman. But it doesn't matter. Everything has to be construed in the worst possible light, even stupid costumes. And then we have to have safe spaces. So you have somebody like Ruth McAfee, who's Assistant Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Uselessness. And she writes, it pains me to be sending out yet another email advertising a safe space hosted by the Multicultural Graduate Network and the Black Graduate and Professional Studies Association because, in theory, students should feel safe in any space on this campus. In wake of the recent events that have occurred, they're offering a safe space for grad students hurt by this to come and relax, vent, and or just enjoy one another's company. First of all, I'm just going to argue with this. When LaRuth McAfee says it pains her to send out yet another email advertising a safe space, it does not pain her. That's literally why she gets paid. If there were no safe spaces, she would be out of a job. They need to create need for safe spaces, otherwise administrators get fired. Right? But the left won't ever say grow up to anybody unless you're on the right. Unless you're on the right. So the same administration that declared a safe space because of a costume says it's okay for one of its students to sell hoodies that say all white people are racist. The same student also marketed hoodies reading, quote, if I encounter another cop with a God complex, I'm going to have to show the world that they are human. And the administration has nothing to say about that. UW said, in this case, the individuals involved are exercising their rights to free speech and engaging in a private activity unrelated to their status as student. Ah, I get it. So now free speech is okay. Now free speech is okay. How convenient for everybody. I mean, again, I love the administration's decision here to suggest that if we have to sit around waiting for these idiots to leave for 20 minutes because if the police have to arrest anybody, they have to shut down the entire event. Right? So I can't speak and you can't listen if idiots get arrested, which makes perfect sense, except for not. Okay? Safe spaces are safe in the same way that the Matrix is safe. It's nice and safe until you wake up and you realize that you're actually in a bucket of goo and there's a wire strapped into your head. As you can tell from our guests earlier, all of this is making college students totally insane. It's making them whiny, crybaby, insane people. And it makes them evil too. Because if you're constantly on the lookout to be a victim and you think you can act with violence to people who victimize you, you're going to end up hurting other people. You will. You will end up doing bad things and hurting other people. It is important that we all get out of this victim group mentality and fight that mentality at every turn. Here's the truth. America is the safe space, and nobody cares enough to victimize you. No one cares about you. Your parents do. My kids care about me. My wife cares about me. My parents care about me. Nobody else cares about me. Great. I don't want people bothering me. I don't want people telling me things I can't do. The more, you may have noticed this from leftist government, the more people say they care about you, the more they want to bother you. Okay, but in America, nobody cares about you. It's your job to make your way in the world, and nobody is going to get in your way because they don't spend every waking moment thinking about how to keep you down. They have other things to do. They have jobs, they have lives, they have children, they have wives, they have husbands, they have lovers. I mean, they have everything going on in their own life. They don't have time to worry about the whiny snowflake who's here on a state subsidy tuition. They don't. So the idea that you need a safe space from all these people, they don't care enough about you to worry about how to stop you. And that's the wonderful thing about America. And that's why we have to fight for every shred of freedom that we can keep. We have to fight every shred of political correctness. We have to stop this nonsense, because the more of this fascistic nonsense there is, the more talk about social justice and white privilege and safe spaces and trigger warnings and microaggressions, the more of this nonsense there is, the less freedom there will be. And if we don't maintain that freedom, there will be no safe space for anyone. And we, all the people in this room now, all the people who are hearing my words, we are the dividing line between freedom and tyranny. Ronald Reagan once said that freedom was always one generation away from extinction. Well, freedom is also always one generation away from revitalization. And we can be that generation if we stand up and stand together and stand for freedom. Thanks so much. Happy to take your questions.
It's time to escape, but I don't know where the fuck I'm headed. Up or down, right or left.